Good evening, Hadley Wood, and welcome back to HWJC Live. I'm excited, privileged to have Jeff Finegold with me tonight. Jeff is a fascinating character. I've only got to know him recently. I've only joined the show recently, but he, as everyone knows already, he is a solicitor. That's his job. That's his day job, but he does lots of other stuff in addition to that. He's a car enthusiast. He's a blue badge guide. He is a quiz show, or was a quiz show contestant. He starred in some films. Jeff is a fascinating guy and a real interesting character. So Jeff, welcome to the HWJC live show. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm just getting myself into position.
Okay, good. Good evening, Jeff. Chanukah Sameach. Nice to see you. So, Jeff, with that introduction, tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? What was life like for you growing up, and how did you become so interesting?
Well, I wouldn't like to call myself interesting. Perhaps other people do. I think I'd be a bit chutzpahdik, as we say in Latin. I was born at a very early age in the Bearsted Hospital, which was a Jewish maternity hospital in Stoke Newington, which isn't there anymore. And from there on, it was just only upwards. My parents lived in Wood Green, of all places, but they both came from Stamford Hill, Stoke Newington. And then they moved to Southgate in 1960. And I grew up and lived in Southgate until I got married. So I was bar mitzvah in Old Farm Avenue. I had my bar mitzvah party in the Morris Tilkoff Hall on June the 21st, 1970, which was the day of the World Cup final. Not like the film, 66. It was 4 years later. People did turn up.
Who was playing in 1970? Was it Brazil, Italy? Is that right?
Yeah, somebody else will have to tell me. I've never been a football fan. That's not one of them.
I think I checked it up. I think it was Brazil, Italy. I think Brazil won 4-2, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there you go. You've obviously looked it up. But I remember people were in the cloakroom because the guy looking after the coats had a little black and white telly, and every 2 minutes they were rushing downstairs to see what happened. But they
yeah, exactly. Yeah, nowadays you can watch the World Cup and be at bar mitzvah at the same time. If you just have your phone, under the table, you can do both.
Yeah. You don't think of that, do you? I think I have an 8mm movie film that my uncle took of it. Silent on film, and I think you had 4 minutes on a roll of film. I'm just thinking what we're doing now in the space of life. To mind you, it was 50 years ago this year, my bar mitzvah. So.
Mazel tov.
Incredible. Thank you. And you heard my mufti yesterday.
I did hear your mufti yesterday. Yes, fantastic. Good job.
Thank you.
So, that's your sort of background growing up, but there's lots of other interesting things which I can see we have down over here about, the interesting things you've got involved with. Perhaps let's talk about your obsession with cars for a start. Where did that come from, and why are you so obsessed with cars? Where did that come from?
Well, I'm not actually, funny enough, contrary to what people think, I'm not actually that obsessed with cars. I'm more obsessed with the design of cars. I enjoy retro things. I think the 50s was a great time for design and the style, American style of modern, and the sort of the Las Vegas style of things. So I'm really quite interested in that period. But if you asked me to fix my car, I could do some things to it, but not a great deal. But I just like driving it when you can. This year I haven't driven it at all. I think I've got visiting rights to see it in the garage where I keep it, but you can't take it anywhere. There's been no car shows, classic car shows, and you don't.
You would go to car shows with it?
Yeah. I wouldn't, it's not a car you leave in Sainsbury's car park, because it's likely to get a bit dented. So you have to take it somewhere where it can be looked after.
Right. So you look after that baby of yours, that car of yours.
Yes, it is a baby. It's a Ford Thunderbird, 1956. So I'm just getting myself comfortable.
And how long ago did you buy that car?
About 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
I went to a dealer and he said, did you know that a certain well-known rock star who does a New Year's Eve party every year. It collects American cars, and I was going to sell it to him for X, and I can sell it to you for the same. So every time I see this guy on television, I think I've got your car. If it's a true story.
Yeah. Well, you can always sell it to him if you feel like do with a different one. Blue Badge Guide. Why? Where did that come from? What got you obsessed with I guess the city of London and taking people around? Has that always been an interest of yours?
I like. Well, you can hear. I've got a good memory, and I'm interested. I've got a lot of interest. I'm interested in. You never used to go anywhere as a kid, right? My father used to drive. He was a rep for a greeting card company. He was on the road in London all the time. Last thing he wanted to do when he got home on a Sunday was to go out anywhere. So our idea of a good outing would be to go all the way to St Albans, which I used to think was miles out. I mean, now you get of course, the roads have changed since then. But so we never went anywhere. So as soon as I started getting into my teens and I could get around myself, I was fascinated by the places that we'd never been to. I mean, I hadn't been in an aeroplane till I was 17. So all of this fascinated me, whereas other people sort of took it for granted. And when I was in my 30s, I just saw an ad in the paper that said that tourism would be the business of the future. And there's a shortage of London guides. So I applied. It's not so easy to get in if you don't speak another language, which I don't. And but I passed the audition, I sat the entrance exam, and I was allowed onto the course. And it's two winters. We do weekends. They take you out in coaches to the various places that you have to be, and you have to walk around and do your stuff. And then you have exams, and it's quite interesting. I think the funniest thing is we had an Israeli girl on our course, and she couldn't understand the obsession with cathedrals and churches, because coming from Israel, there's obviously there is an established faith, but it's not based on the churches. Of course, no matter whether we were religious or not, we grew up with knowing that there's an established Church of England here, and she just couldn't get it in her head that there's what a church was about, because she grew up as a Sabra in Israel. She knew
interesting.
She never went to one until she came to England.
It's interesting because you'd imagine she'd have seen something similar in Israel regarding synagogues, shuls, and she might have just.
But she couldn't get this because she knew, obviously, learned about synagogues and shuls.
Yeah.
But she never learned. No one teaches anybody there in Christianity if you're Jewish.
Right.
So this was very, very hard for her. She couldn't. She passed in the end, but
right.
I had to say, don't worry. It's fine. Just take it easy. And she was obsessed. I don't know anything about churches. What's churches? Very interesting.
And you enjoy taking people around. I guess it's fun to meet new people and show them.
I enjoy people enjoying themselves. I think it's. I like to think they enjoy themselves. And if they can learn something or take home, as I said to someone yesterday, if they can go home to their spouse or their parent or child and say, you know what, I learned one thing today that I didn't know, then. This is probably similar to your sort of business. If someone can come home from a sermon and say, I really remembered what Akiva said. I mean, because I do the same. Chief Rabbi, when Rabbi Sachs died, I remember every time I heard him speak, I used to walk away with something that I'd never heard before, with an inspiring word. And I'd like to think that, perhaps people do the same on a lower level when they come on a guided tour. We're here for.
Yeah, sounds cool. Well, I'm just curious then. What sort of interesting things can you tell us about London that we may not know about already?
Well, I'm really interested at the moment in Roman London. People think, they look at all these huge tower blocks like the Shard and everything, and they think how it's destroying London. But in fact, from an archaeologist's point of view, if it wasn't for all this excavation work, we wouldn't know half as much as we now do. In the last 20 to 30 years, we know more about Roman London than we knew for 100 years before that, because it's compulsory to have an archaeological dig before you start building in the City of London, which the developer has to pay for. It's not done for free. And there's a lot of stuff which they dug up. I mean, for example, when they were building the Guildhall Art Gallery, right, they started digging up and they suddenly found what they'd been looking for 100 years. They knew London was the size of a city which would have a Colosseum theatre, and they found it. And so they had to completely revamp the design of the Guildhall Art Gallery. And as part of that, you can go there and you can see the rows where the gladiators used to sit or get ready for their battles. And in fact, they kicked themselves afterwards, because if you look at a plan of London from the air, there's two streets there that curve round each other, following the outside of what was the theatre, and they'd never realised that those two curves followed the line of the old theatre. Very interesting. Wow. That sort of stuff. So there's stuff being done a bit like in Israel with the Herod's Palace, which they've just I read the other day, they've just dug up a whole new section of it. You know, every day they're
finding things in Israel all the time. It's unbelievable. Yeah, I guess in London as well. Never thought about that, but if they're doing all these building and construction in London, that they're probably going to find a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's also when they built the Jubilee Line extension, they always thought that the north bank of the Thames, because we're in North Londoners, we think we're supreme, but in fact, it looks like the Romans settled the south bank first and then went to the north bank, and that's because they dug up at Southwark as part and parcel of the Jubilee Line extension. So there's quite interesting stuff.
Fascinating. Cool. Maybe I'll come on one of your tours. Jeff.
Sure.
Okay, I wanted to talk about your interest in film as well before we get onto that, because I know you run the film club over here in Shull, so I take it you're probably quite interested in film. But in our little pre-talk, you mentioned something about being in a film yourself. Can you tell us a bit more about what that, how that happened and how you ended up being in?
Yeah. Well, this was quite funny, actually. In fact, it's only recently I realised I was second choice, but hey, what the hell. I went to JFS, and JFS was involved in providing the cast for an acted documentary about a guy growing up in the East End. And it was called, I think, Just One Kid or Only One Kid. And it was an ATV television programme. And it took the story by Bernard Copps, which is a well-known playwright, about a chap called Alfred Maron, who was a bit part actor and a tailor at the same time, and had his tailor's shop in the East End. And it was his story about how he grew up and how he went, how his sister died of TB, and how he went with the Country Holiday Fund to Romney, Hyde and Dymchurch or somewhere like that. And that was all acted out in period costume, a film thing. Of course, in those days, there wasn't the nostalgia kick in 1974 for the East End as it was. People were still pleased to have got away. So it was one of the first sort of programmes looking back on what was happening to the East End then and what it used to be like. And for some unknown reason, I got to play his elder brother, the protagonist, as a little boy, and I was his elder brother. And it was all filmed on location in the East End, and because it was a JFS production, we all had to have kosher food, so it was really bad because we had to go to Bloom's every day for lunch. It was just too terrible.
Sounds horrific.
Yes, I mean it's actually on the British Film Institute Jewish. It's down as in the Jewish community website on the British Film Institute. It is a protected film, so if you want to see it, you can just go on for free and watch.
What's the film called?
I think it's Only One Kid or Just One Kid, but you have to go into the British Film Institute website and you'll find it there in the Jewish section.
I think when you mentioned it to me, I think I tried searching for it on YouTube. I think it might be on YouTube, that film. It's Only One Kid.
You do it through YouTube. Yeah, you do it through YouTube.
Yeah, you can just find it on YouTube. Yeah, interesting. Fascinating.
I was a lot younger then. I was 17. But the interesting from my point of view is that because the costumes had already been cast for someone else who decided that he didn't want to do it. I had to wear his clothes, and I think it was very East Endish because they didn't fit, which is what used to happen in the East End. According to you got these hand-me-down clothes and you wore them whether you fitted them or not. And also in the 1970s, it was the era of long shoulder-length hair for men, and I had to have a really severe haircut. A bit different now, but to look like a 1930s boy. But,
shame. Then you come back to school and you're no longer in the fashion.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess for good reasons. It's cool to be in a film. I guess they let you off.
Yeah, I think so.
I wanted to. There's lots of I guess before we start talking about the things you do for the shul as well, maybe tell us a bit about your moment of glory on Mastermind and your
glory. I mean, I've dined out on it for many years. Most people sure go, "Oh, not that again." But
oh no,
just Vicky decided that she was going to enter me for Mastermind because I suppose I drive her mad with all this, I know that. I mean, she says, "Well, just if you think you're so clever, why don't you go into it?" So we did. I did, and I was answering questions about one of my other obsessions, which is aeroplanes, Second World War aeroplanes. And I lost by a point, but I won my specialist round. This was in 1992. And the funny thing, I just remembered, since I spoke to you about this, I remembered it was shown on a Sunday evening. And in those days, I used to work out in Stevenage, and I used to get the train to work. And I got on the platform, just as I would do normally, on the Monday morning, and then I suddenly realised everyone's pointing at me because they're obviously saying, when they watched Mastermind the previous night, that bloke, I'm sure he goes on the train with us to Stevenage every morning. And of course, yes, it was me. So I had literally my 15 minutes of fame, but I didn't realise until afterwards why they were pointing at me. I didn't feel it.
No one came over to you and asked you?
No, well, English people are a little bit reserved, aren't they? It's no one would come.
Fair enough.
I think things would be different a good few years later, but in those days,
yeah, you're right. Back then, people wouldn't dare ask you something if they didn't know you. Good point. Okay, well, Jeff, that's a fascinating life that you live, and interesting to hear about it as well. But what would be might be interesting as well is to maybe talk about the things you do for the shul, because you, as mentioned, you run the film club, which we'll talk about. I wonder if The Wizard of Oz, by the way, is one of your favorite films, is it? Because I see that poster right behind you.
Also, it was just cheap poster from TJ Maxx, so we bought it as well. But I shouldn't have. I mean, I'm probably no more interested or more knowledgeable than most people about films. I just thought it would be a good idea at this sort of time of the year when the Sundays are very cold and nobody really wants to go out, to put on a film, let's say, I think we used to do about 4 o'clock or 3, I can't remember, I used to, where people had finished their lunch and it would be a shortish film, let's say an hour and a half, and they'd be able to get away. If they're going somewhere in the evening afterwards, it wouldn't take too much out of the day. It would be like dead time. And we used to do it before the shul was, we used to project it. I've got a projector in the old shul. And since we've got the new shul, we have have you noticed, a nice big television inside the cupboard.
Plasma TV, yeah.
Yeah, we've been using that. And we've had some quite good films. I think one that went down particularly well was the one about the volunteer pilots, of all things, that flew for the Chel Avir, the Israeli Air Force in '48, Americans and South Africans, and they interviewed them, and that went down particularly well. But if I find something that's of Jewish interest, we had a nice film about the founding of the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra and how it saved 200 people from the Shoah by getting them to Palestine and forming the orchestra. And they've worked out how many.
So do you have any plans do you have anything you could do, given the current restrictions? It's very difficult to have people together for a film, but do you have any ideas as to how to do films even now?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things that I had an idea of, and I'd be interested for some feedback, people, is that I'll do an introduction to a film, which you can then download and watch. And then after you've watched it, we'll do a sort of a chat, Zoom chat, and see people talk about it, appreciate it, discuss it. Obviously, it'll be a short film because there won't be, you don't want to spend after 2-hour film chatting it. You probably just want to have a cup of tea. But something like along those lines. I mean, I have been during the first lockdown. I was sending a film a day, a link to film a day to everybody, except for Friday and Shabbat. So something that we.
I was going to say, but lockdown's like a dream come true for film enthusiasts. It means you've got all the time in the world to watch all the films you never thought you had time for.
Well, there's some very interesting thing on the BFI site, apart from my own thing. There's a very interesting interview with Maureen Lipman, straight out of drama school, which is ever so posh. She'd just been in a film, and the world was her oyster. So that's quite interesting. Whoever's curated that site is quite good. It's even got weddings, silent weddings, Jewish weddings, going back to about 1920.
Wow.
It's got some bits and pieces about a whole load of Jewish pensioners from Southend won the pools, and it had a very young presenter interviewing them, who is Judy from Richard and Judy, and one of her first assignments. So there's some quite interesting stuff on that site. Also, there's an article about people that were going to the David Eder farm, which was the Habonim farm that prepared people for Aliyah, and it was filmed just as the 6-Day War broke out. So there's quite a lot filmed at the airport, and interviews with people, and films of Ben Gurion coming over to talk to them. And it may have been quite ordinary at the time, but now of course it's very, very historic.
Well, that's an interesting idea. Look, if anyone who's watching now or anyone who's watching later, the recorded one, if you find that to be a good idea, then please contact Jeff directly, and perhaps that's something people would be interested in doing, in watching one of those films and then discussing it afterwards via Zoom. It sounds like a nice idea, Jeff.
If anybody has found some, I know occasionally I get people sending me suggestions for films, and obviously we have to be, because it's a short matter, we can't be too radical.
No 18 plus.
In choice of films. Some of them are 18 plus, but so we have to be a bit careful. But subject to that, if anyone's got anything interesting, please let me know.
Yeah. Okay. So let's spend the last few minutes then. So we're getting close to time. I can't believe it. We're getting close to time over here about adult education in the shul. I know this is a big passion of yours. I joined the shul recently. So how did you get involved with adult education? Was it just thrust upon you, or was this something which you really wanted to do?
Actually, a volunteer. Well, and I'm not trying to tread on anybody's toes, but listening to people daven in shul, I could hear that their Hebrew possibly wasn't as good as it could be, or it should have been, and I feel, and it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, that unless you have the tools of Hebrew to be able to read Hebrew comfortably, then that's really what keeps. I mean, other people say other things, but keeps a community together, and also helps if when I teach, I try and explain what some of the words mean. It's not just learning to read the Hebrew, although we have to start at the beginning. And I can't remember. I think it was I'd suggested that we put an announcement. I was at the Ne'ilah, or during the middle of it was at the middle of Yom Kippur, that anybody who was interested in the service, let me know, because of course you get a capacity crowd then. And we've had a few people. We had various members of the community who either didn't know any Hebrew, and or who wanted to improve their Hebrew. And we had a really interesting crowd here. It was a social thing as well. I don't think we had our heads down in the books all the time, but we had like Hanukkah parties. We learned to read Malzor. We learned to do Birchat Hamazon.
So you're saying it's possible then? I think people sometimes get a bit nervous that it's too late. Is it too late to learn Hebrew, or can you do it no matter?
I mean, teaching adults Hebrew is half an hour of tuition and half an hour of psychology, because everyone wants to unload on why they didn't learn, that they were evacuated. No, it's not facetious. It genuinely is. And that's what's
really?
learning over the years, and I want to get over that because it's never too late to learn. It's not hard work. We have a bit of fun. I've got a very good course, which I've got the books for. So anybody who wants to get the Hebrew going, because unfortunately there's going to be certain times in your life where you have to use your Hebrew to say Kaddish. And if not for that reason alone, then we ought to learn and do some nice stuff with it. You know, things like the Book of Ruth. You know, the Book of Ruth, very few, from a grammar point of view, there's very few places, and you back me up on this, where you use the female plural. Because whenever anyone's talking to anybody in the children of Israel, it's a mixed crowd. And if it's a mixed crowd, you use the masculine. But in the story of Ruth, which we always do around about Shavuot time with the class, you know, you've got Naomi talking to her two daughters-in-law. And it uses bits and pieces of Hebrew that you don't see anywhere else, because there's never a group of women, exclusively women, being spoken to. So there's
never considered that before, Jeff. It's interesting.
Also, the story of the Akedah, which is like a telephone call. You know, Abraham's speaking to God, and God is obvious, but you hear what God's saying, but you don't hear what Abraham's saying. So you hear God saying, take your son, and Abraham's obviously saying to him, but I've got two sons. And he says, your only son. He says, well, God, I've got two sons, but that's all off screen. The one you love. And then he knows it's Isaac, because he unfortunately didn't love Ishmael. So it's not just reading, it's using the words to get a story out. And people actually do actually take to that side of things. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a heavy duty educator, but I know my way around Hebrew.
Well, it's definitely, you know, it's different. It's night and day when you're studying the parasha, when you understand the Hebrew, and when you're just relying on the English, because it's not possible to have a translation which isn't already, you know, taking a stance in terms of what the message is. So you're not going to be able to remain absolutely neutral about what the Hebrew is saying. So yes, definitely.
Like you said yesterday about the Joseph story, that these stories have endured for thousands of years because they're stories about people, that you could think of people you know that have these terrible tests. You're asked to murder your son, or you're thrown in the pit, and this sort of stuff. These you know, you're seduced by your boss's, or attempted seduction by your boss's wife. You know, these are real stories. These are real people. And
yeah. I mean, that's why the stories are there as well. That the stories are there to teach us about life. They're not just you know, historical just stories.
Correct.
You know, that they're there to teach us lessons.
I agree.
That's a first. Two Jews get together and they agree.
Two Jews.
Sorry.
Two Jews, three opinions.
Yeah, exactly. This somehow we had two Jews, one opinion just now, which was fantastic. So we're just coming to a close over here, but Jeff, I think it's incredible that you've taken this upon yourself to sort of run the adult education, and obviously it's been difficult, almost impossible to have anything in you know, to do something proper the way we would have liked to during the current, you know, during the coronavirus restrictions. But obviously we will work together and develop various programs which we can put on for the community.
Not taking the credit from the previous rabbi, who did a huge amount of adult education, but it was the sort of things that didn't need him to do. Like we put on a Rosh Hashanah fair where we had people teaching how to make a shofar, people teaching cooking, selling stuff for Rosh Hashanah, because we've got the separate rooms, which you can divide off to have someone doing cooking. That's sort of what I call semi-lay Jewish education is the sort of stuff that I'm interested in, plus the teaching, of course. Excuse me. Fantastic. Okay, well, if anyone who's watching now and watching later has any ideas or interests in terms of the adult education in the shul, then please do contact Jeff or contact myself, and it'd be wonderful to put things on, obviously virtually at the moment, but eventually in person once things calm down out there. But just before we close, Jeff, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. It's been fascinating to hear about your life, to hear about the things you've got up to, and look forward to
hearing much more from you in the time that we spent together here at Hadley Woods. Wishing you a Chanukah Sameach and everything good.
Yeah, thank you very much. And by the way, it's one thing that I have forgotten is Deborah is doing the bat mitzvah class for people that have never had a bat mitzvah before, older people. And that's something that we wanted to finish in the previous thing. Please, 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 if you've not had a bat mitzvah or a bat chayil and you want to have one, please deal with it. Please deal with it now. Go and speak to Deborah. We need to get it started. Right.
Deborah, you mean Deborah Meyer? Is this Deborah Myers or?
Oh, no, Deborah Pittle.
Deborah Pittle. Okay, fine. Good. Because we've got two Deborahs.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff. Have a good night, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Great to have you on again. And looking forward to seeing you all next Sunday. Same time, same place. Have a wonderful evening and Chanukah Sameach.